Ja, Dr. Eberhard.
Dr. Eberhard, for many people, or probably for all people who have had a near-death experience, it's obvious that there is life after death. However, there's also the idea that we may live again on Earth, that we may live more than just one life. In thanatology, are there also reports known that talk about reincarnation?
There are near-death experiences that refer directly to reincarnation. Even the first near-death experience that we know of, which is 2,500 years old, and was reported by Plato, talks about reincarnation. In this case, reincarnation is even an important part of the near-death experience. There are just a few cases, but there have also been near-death experiences where people were shown former lives during their panorama of life. Those may only be snippets, extracts of these lives. I know of a near-death experience of a soldier during World War II who practically had a near-death experience while he was wounded, and then he experienced his last deaths that had also been violent. So he saw himself as a fighter pilot during World War I, when his plane crashed, and then he saw himself again a long time back as a Roman legionary in Britain, or he was a leader of a small Roman troop, and they were attacked by the Celtic natives, and he died during this attack. Of course, what's also interesting are visions of reincarnation that are told by children who had near-death experiences, because these children usually don't have anything to do with reincarnation in Western society, because the idea of reincarnation is more widespread in Asian countries, and their reincarnation isn't really such a big deal. However, if they occur in these children who had a near-death experience, and they talk about reincarnation, it's quite astonishing. And one of these stories is very impressive. It's the near-death experience of a 9-year-old called Erin. She was interviewed by Cheryl Sutherland 1 year after she had a near-death experience. And during this interview, she eloquently talked about her near-death experience, as it is oftentimes the case. And there she was given a choice. During near-death experiences, it's quite rare to have the choice whether you want to come back or not. In her case, she had 3 options. One of them was staying line, so she could have chosen to stay there. Then she could have chosen to be reborn in a healthy body, or she could have chosen the hardest path and go back into her own body but be disabled, which she chose. So she was disabled after this. She had a severe asthma attack and a cardiac arrest, which led to a brain damage and a motoric paralysis similar to Parkinson. However, she didn't have any mental restrictions. In the end, she chose this third option. So there are definitely indications that point towards reincarnation.
Are there also reports by people who had a near-death experience that explicitly point against reincarnation?
This is a very interesting question, and since near-death experiences are so individual, we may assume that these cases may exist too. However, I only know of one case by Howard Storm. He was a professor of art in Paris. After a severe gastric bleeding, he had a very intense near-death experience and became very blissful. And during this near-death experience, he also asked the question, what's it like? Are we born more than once? And according to his interpretation, the answer was no, and that we just have this one life. He then became a priest, which also fit his religious worldview, because in the Christian belief system, reincarnation hardly ever occurs, and doesn't really exist in Christianity.
Have there been done studies that objectify the question whether the majority of people who had a near-death experience believe in reincarnation?
Hardly. There is a study that was done by Amber Wells in 1993 where he explicitly asked people who'd had a near-death experience about that. And then there are individual cases, like the examples that I just mentioned before, plus 2 studies that point towards the trend where I'd say this wasn't explicitly studied, but it was still mentioned that there is this trend towards the belief in reincarnation, which increases after a person had a near-death experience.
According to your personal view, what indicates that reincarnation does exist?
To me, it seems very plausible. Maybe one reason is also how persuading the idea of reincarnation is, and that's why many people believe in reincarnation after they had a near-death experience. Generally, people who had a near-death experience find it easier to detach themselves from fairly traditional or thematically fixed religions. They feel that they are spiritual, but not necessarily religious anymore. If we put this into a Christian context, where we don't really find reincarnation often, I think reincarnation still has something that is quite persuasive, because it gives an answer to why there is inequality in the world. If we just believe in one life, and that we only come into existence in this life, then we actually don't have a plausible explanation for this inequality, such as why there are children who just live for a few seconds, or people who have to live under very difficult conditions. There is a huge disparity. If all of us were here for the first time, we wouldn't really have an explanation for this. And we have to be careful, because reincarnation and karma certainly don't give an answer to individual fates, but to the general concept. This philosophical question regarding this inequality in the world, and with reincarnation, we'd get a balance. We live more often than just once. Also, that it is a sort of an education, or that we trigger something, and that we come back. And that's something I find very convincing. And then if you deal with near-death experiences, there are also these experiences that point towards it, which take on this position that, let's say, is a very pragmatic and a very simple explanation. And that's why reincarnation makes sense. And eventually, there is also the research of reincarnation of which we rely on, which is actually already quite developed and has also discovered very impressive cases.
In summary, what does the research of reincarnation tell us?
Well, the research of reincarnation was founded by Jan Stevenson, who already passed away, but he was one of the pioneers in this field. In the 1970s, he began to examine cases in Europe, the US, and also in India. Because in India, children are more likely to remember reincarnation, where these things are at least more noticed and not pushed back, where the reports of children are also fostered. He almost examined about 2,500 cases of reincarnation, or memories of reincarnation. That's what we should call it. So he examined children that remembered their reincarnation and put them in the context of plausibility. And he also verified them. And there are several cases of reincarnation where children know something they couldn't have known, and when he did some research, he could verify them. Out of these 2,500 cases, he had to exclude a lot of them. In the end, he limited the number to just a few cases, which are partially very impressive. So these studies do exist, and they indicate that reincarnation is something that concerns at least certain souls, or maybe all of them. So we've got this indication, and now there is the question, if somebody knows something about a different life, this isn't proof for reincarnation yet, because this could also be knowledge that could have been obtained by telepathic abilities. But then this would also be paranormal, and if we have to utilize paranormal explanations for such cases, and this is what it points towards, then this is the most obvious explanation. It's what the child feels. I am reborn. I don't belong to this family. My parents' names are such and live in, and then they find these parents. So, if this really exists, we don't really have to add telepathy to our explanation. We can take the existence of reincarnation as the most plausible explanation into account.
Of course, the classic question regarding reincarnation is, why can't we remember it? Obviously, there are also a few people who remember their reincarnation, who are not experienced in this field.
Yes, there must be a meaning behind it. It is interesting that this was already mentioned in the first near-death experience that was ever reported, namely the soldier that was mentioned by Plato. Plato describes in great detail how the souls have to drink from the river Lethe before they reincarnate. It's this legendary river in Greek mythology that contains some sort of a liquid of oblivion, which they must drink, and then they forget everything and are reborn, with the exception of this soldier who was told that he wasn't allowed to drink because he should report about it, so he didn't reincarnate in a different body as such, but went back into his old body. So in this sense, people already imagined reincarnation in the ancient times, or they experienced it in such a way. So there must be a meaning behind it. If you, and that's what most people who had a near-death experience say, see a mystic experience or even a reincarnation as a chance to grow internally, to expand your consciousness, to strengthen the ability to love. When we take all these aspects into account, the memory of a former life could actually be restrictive. Somebody could just expand their life, as we can often see in biblical ideas. But I think it's pretty clear that this would have a complete different effect than as if we were born several times, because then we would start fresh every time. It would be a new beginning, but also a huge chance. It's pretty clear that if we just extend our life, we'd be within our old structures. This wouldn't be the case with a new life anymore. However, if we could remember our former life, then we'd try to do just that. We'd try to continue our old life in this sense. It may be that we bring some baggage due to, let's say, moral transgressions. It may be that we go back to old ideas that really inhibit us. It may also be the case that we could remember being a great personality, a rich personality, and we could try and claim this back, because now we'd have to live under very poor conditions. This can't be. I used to be a king, so there are many reasons that indicate why it would be better if we didn't know anything about our former lives.
So, reincarnation is a chance, and the lack of memory is also a chance. However, why are there some people who had a near-death experience? Why can they remember their former life on Earth?
Well, here I can only propose a hypothesis. My explanation actually points towards the aspect that many people who've had a near-death experience come back with a task. And oftentimes, they're explicitly told, the time hasn't come yet, you've got a task to fulfill. And with some people, this task also involves talking about this experience, which is also connected to a sort of hope, and also to mediate a sort of hope and comfort. What happens after death, but also to teach people. And let's say reincarnation is reality, then it could definitely be a task to mediate this reality.
What is your personal opinion? Do you think you've already lived several times here on Earth?
I can actually remember quite well when I heard about the idea of reincarnation for the first time. I remember my father and brother, we were still children, or between childhood and adolescence. We were on holiday in Italy, and walking along a road in the evening, my father, who still works like 15, 16, 17 hours per day, well, we didn't see him much. However, when we went on holiday with him, it was very special to go for a walk with him in the evenings. And one evening, he told us about the idea of reincarnation for the first time and what's involved in it. And this evening was unforgettable. I just found this idea so touching and significant. It was as if a key to comprehension was given to me. Like, how can we actually explain all those difficulties? The huge disparity between faiths, or how can we suddenly understand them with the help of this idea? Because in my opinion, reincarnation is the only answer to this disparity, and it may be an explanation that is at least understandable to us humans when it comes to the question, why are there so many different fates? If we assume that we're on Earth just once and also believe that the existence of every person begins at birth, then there's no explanation to that. At least not a comprehensive explanation that explains why one life is very short and another life is long, why some lives are more burdensome or tragic and other lives are dipped in gold. However, if we look at this in a bigger context and envision several lives, then we've got at least an explanation to why some lives can be good and others bad. We'd have a certain balance. Then we'd also have more justice that somehow wouldn't exist otherwise. And insofar, I would say that to me, the idea of a life that just exists once would stop at our development. And I think we as humans, that's something near-death experiences show as well. We depend on developing further. We shouldn't just stand still. This is something that's been emphasized by people who've had near-death experiences. And according to them, life continues, and we have to develop further to learn. And reincarnation gives an exemplary opportunity to restart again. And that's why I find this would be a wonderful chance if reincarnation really exists.
Very interesting thoughts. Many thanks for this informative interview.